Welcome to Cutting the Crap with Shap. Thank you so much for checking out my podcast. I really appreciate it. Obviously, if you'd like to be on the podcast, please let me know. I'd love to have you. And I am super excited to be with my friend, colleague, awesome leader, Dr. Joe Carracappa. Joe, how you doing, bud?
Good evening, Shap. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. We're going to have a great time together.
I'm really excited.
Yep. So before I kind of have Joe give a little backstory, I've worked with Joe for a few years. And one thing I'll mention is when Joe first came to our school, I've been at the school for a while, been a teacher there for a while, and it's always very interesting from a leadership standpoint. Joe and I connected very quickly, and we've connected often. We share a incredible passion for education, and I think I don't think that is one of the reasons he's on here today, because I know his passion for being a leader, for being an educator, and for kids is something that I hold dear. And I think he's going to have an incredible impact on those of you who watch this. He's a great man. Joe, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, okay?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. So, as Shap said, my name is Dr. Joseph Carracappa. I've been in the education profession for about 28 years now. I've worked at every level. I have been an elementary teacher, I've been an elementary assistant principal, been a middle school assistant principal, high school assistant principal, high school principal. Haven't made that leap to central office yet, but one of the reasons is because I really like, being with the kids. I'm afraid to get further and further away from that. Over the course of my career, I've had the luxury of seeing education at every level, which I think has really served me well when you talk about the perspective that we need to have as educators and dealing with kids of all ages. So I've worked at, I started my career in the Colonial School District in Pennsylvania, where I was a teacher and an administrator. I was the principal at Upper Moreland High School for 8 years, and now made the transition to Centennial School District, where I am the 11th grade house principal. So really happy to join our team at William Tennant. It was a tough time for everybody in 2020. Everybody was home for COVID. And I had the opportunity to work with some tremendous leaders. I took the leap, and I have not regretted it a single day. And I got to meet one of my best colleagues, and when the day I met Shap. So when he said he was running this, iPad thing, or I don't even know what you call it, Shap. That's how many I've been on, right? And he said, "Hey, will you be on my show?" And I said, "You have a show?" I said, "Yeah, I'm in, man. I would love to do that." So,
Classic.
of course, I'm one of those guys. Anything I can do to help you, and then I, immediately went, "Oh my God, what are we going to talk about?" Right? So, but one of the things that I really cherish is the relationship I have with Shap, because he is easy to talk to, and we don't always see eye to eye on everything, but I think one of the things I respect the most about Shap is that we listen to each other. And I think the nice thing is, we often reflect on the things that we hear, and we come back thinking, I thought more about that in a couple of days. So our relationship has continued, I think, to grow in the 3 years I've been there. And I wasn't going to miss this opportunity to be on the show. So I'm happy to be here, Shap.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. It means a lot. And it's interesting. Before we hopped on, we were talking about this perspective piece, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that you and I mean, we've talked about that so many times, more times than I can even count, a lot of times. And you mentioned something that, I've been in education for 36 years. This is I think it's my 36. I'm too old, man. I can't even, I can't even think about it, but I know it's 35. It's been a long time. And one of the things that I've seen so much is kind of like leaders come and go, right? Like in, out, all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And every one of the leaders that I've been associated with through a long career has had, I would say, a different perspective of leadership. What does it look like? What does it feel like? And how is it going to impact students, staff, and the community at large? So I know you wanted to talk about that. So give me a little idea of when you say leading from an educational perspective, And I hope I have that right. Tell me what you're
Yeah,
thinking.
no, sure. I mean, I think it starts when you brought up a good point. Like, I think when you look at leadership at the administrative level, I think as teachers, every teacher you run into has a story. Wow, we had an administrator who was only here for a couple of years, and then there was a new one that came in with a couple of years. I can remember when I first got my first appointment as a principal, I think they said I was the seventh principal in 11 years, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a revolving door. And one of the things that I really come to believe now, that I have some tenure and I've been doing this a long time, is that in education, it's unlike any other profession. Like you need to be in a certain position for a certain amount of time to really make an impact. Um, I can remember, talking with superintendents about, every superintendent wants to leave that legacy, right? Their time that
Yeah.
they were the superintendent. What am I going to be remembered for? Um, and one of the things I really cherished is, when I first got into administration, I was an administrator at both the middle school and the high school and the elementary level in the same district. And I didn't like going from one school to the other because I felt like I was just starting to, make relationships and get to know kids and the programs and feel like, oh, I can really make an impact by doing this. And then all of a sudden it was like, hey, we want you to go here now. So when I made my jump to the high school, I remember saying to the superintendent, can I just stay here? Like, just leave me here for a while. I think that's like, I just want to be able to sink my teeth into something. And I
Yeah.
remember that superintendent at the time saying, you, you're going to get there, and if you're good at what you're going to do, you're going to aspire to get your own building. You're going to move on. And I kept saying, well, maybe we'll see. But I ended up there about 7 years, and one thing I did learn was some people might say it's a long time, but for an assistant principal to take on a building and be responsible for the amount of the responsibility it takes to run a building, especially a high school of that size. 7 years is not a long time to learn everything you need to know. And I can remember being a young administrator and thinking, man, I know everything. I can run this building with my left hand. And then you're doing it and you're going, holy cow. Then you start to think, man, will I ever know enough to run it and to run a building? And what you learn is you don't run it on your own,
Yep.
right? And you have to have the capacity to build a good team. And then you have to have the leadership to know that good leaders that you bring onto your team are going to move on because you're going to want them to. You're going to want to help them aspire to take that step. And some don't, and some do, and that's okay. It's really their perspective on what their career is going to look like. But you want to work with people and create a team with them. So one of the first things I learned was, gosh, like you don't have to be the end all. You don't have to have all the answers. You build a good team, and the room's always smarter than the person. So, and you'll get through if you do that. But like the hardest thing I think for leaderships in that role is that when you go into a district and you see, like you said, you have leaders that are moving. They create a program, and then we talk about drive-by programs, right? And then all of a sudden, that administrator leaves, a new one comes in, and then you have a new program. Well, we just sunk our tooth into this one, and you're already telling us we're changing it and trying to do another one. So, stability in any organization, I think, is strong, right? Like you want to see stability. And when I came to the district that Shap and I both work in, that's what I was looking for. I wanted to work with leaders that were going to be there, that had been there for a while, that knew the history, what we call institutional knowledge, right? Things that you can't look up in a book, they would know. And people have said, this, you've said this to me before. Oh, how soon are you going to leave us? When are you going to go? And the reality of it is, like, that's you could, then you gotta spend 5 more years getting to the point where I am now, right?
Yeah.
So, um, if it comes a day that I get to lead a building again in that capacity, it certainly for me will be at a place like that, and frankly, it'll probably be, if it doesn't happen, um, it won't. But I'm not looking to go find another school, start all over again at this point in our careers, right? So
Right.
but you never know. You never know. So, but I would say the leadership perspective piece, right, is can you you and I talk about this, right? Like some people get hung up on titles, being the principal, being the assistant principal, or being a dean, and I've worked at all those levels, and that's the other thing when we talk about leadership, right? The first thing, when you're young, you think, I need a title. Like, I got to
Right.
have the title. And I think as you mature and you gain that experience, what you come to realize when you're talking about leadership, it's really not about the title. It's really about, and we're going to talk about this later, but it's really about, not always you leading everyone, but being willing to step aside and let others lead, and being comfortable enough in your own skin to say, that's what this is about. This isn't about me. It's about us being
I think
together
that's.
and doing what's right for kids.
I think that's. I mean, I think one of the things that we've had a strong relationship is because, and you mentioned this right in the very beginning, and it's because we kind of both listen. Like even if we disagree, it's always out of respect. Always out of respect. And I think from a leadership standpoint, and just any world standpoint, respect is something that is critical to have whenever you're in a building or school, whatever you're doing. You always need to respect each other and be willing to see another person's perspective, but also leading, being able to follow, like that's so critical to be able to do that. Because when people think about leadership, right, and they would say, who is the leader of your building? And obviously, first thing are the principal, right?
Yeah.
And then the assistant principal. And while I would say in title form, that's obviously true, but I also think that effective leaders, whether title or not, are always able to listen, take a step back, and follow others if it's something that is best for kids. Because you even mentioned about leading and following. I find that in my experience, a lot of leaders struggle with that because they think they have all the answers, right?
Yeah.
I'm this title, I have this job, I have all the answers. How do you kind of, like, to people that are watching that are either going to be in that administrative role or they are now, what would you say to them so they maybe could take a step back and look at the people around them from the standpoint of maybe they can be leaders as well?
Yeah. If I was giving advice to a young assistant principal, and we've had a few even since I've been at Cal, right?
Yeah.
And what I've told them is this: like, one, you got to leave your ego at the door. Like,
Hmm.
if you really want to make an impact, and you really want to leave where you are at a better place, if you're aspiring to go on and lead your own building someday, you got to leave your ego at the door, and you have to be willing to say, I know what my strengths are, but I also know what my weaknesses are. And you can't be great at everything, right? And
Right.
and while you may have an opinion on things, you certainly have to be willing to listen, right? Like, you have to be willing to listen. And there are days, right? You know this, like, in leadership roles, you might have to make a decision. You do that, but there's also times, I think, when we lead, especially in the education role, you have to be open. You have to be a good listener. You have to be able to take things in and then reflect. Like, I think, and I've said this to you before, our building leader, I believe she is the best listener I've ever worked with in 28 years. I mean, I've never met anybody who listens the way that she does, and then reflects. Now, everybody has their moments, right?
Hmm.
Everybody has, that moment of frustration or whatever it may be. But really good leaders have that ability to put that in check and then reflect, right? Like, not get up and, upset in the moment, not react in the moment. And I think when you're a young administrator, you have that feeling like, I have to get the answer. I have to know this. I have to
Hmm.
do this, or I have to respond to that email within 30 seconds, right? And you don't. And that's the reality. Like, I think there's quality to be found and slowing down, taking your time. Now that doesn't mean like you get an email and you wait 6 days to respond, right? Like you know what I'm saying, like
Right.
and certain protocols that you follow. And I think that aside, but when you're looking at the building as a whole, and you're saying, like, when you're thinking about building goals and you're talking about the year in perspective, you know, everybody at that table has the ability to lead. I can remember a time when we were thinking about you're trying to come up with things that people can rally on, like phrases, like
Yeah.
jump on the boat, or
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
The main
And
thing. The main thing.
keep the main thing, right? Those
Yeah.
like quick phrases everybody can gather around. And I remember sitting there one day, and everyone's chiming in, and we're writing everything down. I just remember, like, I don't know who it was at the table, but all of a sudden they said something, and I just remember looking up, going, hold on, like, write that on the board, like that. That's like, I want everybody to hear this, right? And they wrote it on the board, and she said it again, and I said, like, that lines up with our mission. Like, sometimes that's what I mean. The room is going to be better than the one. And I think when young administrators are part of a good team, and I think that's the hardest part. Like, I think there's a lot of young administrators that start in our profession, and they're not always on a good team, and they don't always have good leaders. And I'm a firm believer in this. Like, I've worked for principals. It's not my job to make you better, right? It's your job to make me better. But you need to make me look good, and that's okay, and if that's their type of leadership style, doesn't always work for everybody, but maybe it
Mm.
works for that building or that person.
I I I
But
don't I don't know. I'm going to say that the bottom line is everybody's trying to help everybody look better. Like if you
sure,
like if you're
yeah,
if you
I agree with that. But I'm just saying, like, it depends too on your situation. What the building's like. There's all these factors that
Hmm?
you can take into account
Yeah.
for whatever the moment may be, right? And I think when leaders come into the profession, you don't, like, when you get hired, you don't know your team, you don't know who you're
Hmm.
working with, you don't know what's going to be like. But here's the one thing that is consistent: there's no rule book, there's
Hmm.
no, like, owner's manual, right? Like, you're gonna walk in day one, you're gonna get an office, and the things that you have learned through your programs. I've always said this, like, I don't know how many books we've read or how many articles we've read. Um, I don't usually go running to those things to figure out when there's a problem. Right? They're nice to have, but the reality of it is, um, most of your experience is on the job, right?
Hmm.
Like, you're going to go through your day, your first, discipline, your first call home, like, you can practice all those things until you're blue in the face in the mirror, but until you're on the phone with that parent, it's very different.
I
It's
think
very
I
different.
mean I hear what you're saying, and obviously I agree with a lot of what you're saying. The only thing I guess I would take issue with, if that's the right phrase, I don't know if it is or not, is probably along the lines of when I think about, obviously you're 100% right. When somebody walks into a building, they
Mm-hmm.
don't know the culture, the climate, and what it is. They don't know it. They
Right.
hear stories and gossip, which is, of course, BS. You don't want to listen to
Mm-hmm.
that. But
Mm-hmm.
I also think that when I think about effective leadership at every level, it's all about people.
Yeah.
It's always about people because,
Well,
like,
whether it's students, whether it's adults, right,
it's
parents,
all
sure.
it's
It's about
always
the
about
community.
people. Exactly. It's always about people. Like, bottom line is, you and I, we serve the students at our school, the
Yeah.
community, and their families. That's who we serve. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I've been in a situation where the people who get into that position of authority or power, they forget that main message, that it is not about you. Yes, you are in that role, and you do have to make tough decisions. And sometimes people aren't going to like those decisions, but
Mm-hmm.
that also comes from a stance of respect. So it's like if you said to me, Shap, what do you think about this? Which we've said many times. I'd give you my opinion, you know?
Right.
And if you said, I don't agree, and we went back and forth, and you said, hey, I got to make this decision, I would never be offended because, first of all, I felt like I had a voice.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, I felt respected.
Mm-hmm.
And because we're never going to always agree. I mean, somebody's got to make a tough decision, you know, like that's what you're being paid for. That's why you're a doctor, you know. That's
No,
what you.
no, I don't know about that.
I had to throw that in. But I think that, and I'll even touch on that. I think that's kind of like Dr. Joseph Carracappa, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like if you said to me, what do I think about that? I would say your name's Joe.
Sure.
Like, yeah, I'm super
And
proud.
I would prefer that. Like
Yeah.
it's, and again, like, titles don't make you good leaders. Right? I don't know how many titles, and I don't know how many degrees you have, or how many. I, I think when it comes down to being a leader, it's just leadership isn't about just getting people to do what you want, right? Like
Yeah.
when you're in a position of leadership, you probably can direct people to do things, right? We all
Mm-hmm.
know we can do that. The key to leadership is getting them to do that without giving them the direction.
Right.
Right? Like that's it.
Exactly.
Like like getting them to see the big picture, getting them to understand where we're going, how we're going to get there. And the key to that whole thing, Shap, to me, is trust.
Oh.
And I
Oh
think that's the
yeah.
hardest. I think that's the hardest
Mhm.
part when you talk about leadership, when you talk about where do good leaders, or how do you determine who a good leader is, right? Um, and we worked for all kinds of leaders. I worked for many different leaders, and the ones that I think I most respected. Well, I'll tell you this: the ones that I most respected were not afraid to have the tough conversation.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right? They
Yeah.
were honest. They delivered it in a way that you didn't feel threatened or it was punitive. And deep down, I knew it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you got to get into your soul to really go,
Mm-hmm.
what they're saying is right,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't sometimes want to admit it because in our minds, I'm distinguished every day. I'm distinguished every day, right? Me, that's me, right? I'm not talking about anybody else. That's me. I'm distinguished every day. And you can't be, right? You can't. I mean, you
No.
love that mentality, but the reality of it is, we're human. We're not going to be distinguished every day, but we need to find a way to be better every day than we were the day before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not, to me, that's not about being distinguished. I don't that because
But
look, there are going to be days
yeah.
where I'm needs improvement, right? Like it's a bad day, and the key to that is being better the next day.
Well,
And I've
I think.
always treated, I just always felt as a leader, I needed to treat those that worked with me that way, right? Like you need to have empathy, you need to understand,
Oh yeah.
but you also need to hold accountability where it needs to be. And that's hard. And that's what I mean by having the tough conversations because, sometimes we don't see it, right? We don't see eye to eye. Like, I'm going to give you feedback and you go, what? Really? And, and that's really, when you talk about how we move schools and how we're going to, make an impact. And I remember saying this in every interview I've ever had. I remember there was a year that when I was at Upper Moreland, we crushed it. We had so much growth and improvement. It was like we went from the bottom third in the county to the top third in the county. It was, and I mean, everybody was. I mean, when you do that, everybody wants to know, like,
Sure.
but one year people are going to say it's a fluke, but when you do it 2 or 3 years, then everybody wants to know what you're doing, right? So then it was like we were getting calls left, right? What are you guys doing down there? How are you making this kind of growth? And even the state wants to know. So they all want to know. They all want to know, right? And here's the reality of it. For that to happen, one, you need you need to trust the people you work with, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need them to trust what you're selling. And two, I think the biggest thing is, and I truly believe this, if you want to improve and grow and show students are continuously learning, it 100% starts in the classroom. 100%. I can't, and there's a lot of leaders out there. They'll give you lots of perspective, right? And tell you, oh no, yeah, this is a big factor, this is a big factor. I just believe that if you want to see improvement, it starts in the classroom, and it starts with the direct instruction. And I think when you can get buy-in there and you get teachers to understand, like, this isn't going to go away, like, I'm going to be consistent with this, and they continue to hear it and hear it and hear it, it gets better. And then you start to see, as the teachers get better and the kids get better.
But that's been lacking, though. I mean, that, like, you talked about this accountability piece, right? Which I personally believe is lacking in so many levels. From a student standpoint, teacher standpoint, leadership standpoint, I think that when you say it's interesting. I was going to write it down, but I remembered it. And you said, you're selling something, but you're selling them. You want to sell them on something. And I was initially going to kind of like, I don't know, but I agree with you. I do think that you're selling a vision and a certain mission that you're wanting to do. But, and I think this is critical in my experience, if you said to me, Shap, what do you think about this? Let's just say you said, Shap, I'd really like to start this program for students that are struggling. Okay? For me to buy into what you're selling me, I got to believe in my heart that you actually really mean it. Like, that you really mean it. Not that you're just putting it out there, but that you are going to lead with it, give it a chance to be successful, work through the kinks to make it better. Because one of the things that I see whenever somebody says, like, we're selling them on this, my issue becomes very simple. And I always say this, is especially with educators. Educators will have a choice. You're selling me on something, right? Yeah, Joe, yeah, I got it. When I walk away, I have two choices. I can either go with what you're saying, or I can go into my classroom and shut my door and continue to do what I'm doing. And really effective leaders are able to help people to see the overarching goals that they have, which is always, as you said, about students. People will go
out Shap, let me interrupt you just for a second, because here's where I think we've been talking about leadership, and you said, here's how you started off. You said, Joe, you're going to bring me a program and you're going to have to sell me on it, right? So here's where really good leaders are. A good leader never brings it to you. A good leader gets you to tell me what we need to do. Because then I'm not selling you anything, right? But it's got to be something that is, you see the motivation in it. You want to do it. If we're always administrators handing things down and saying, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing, it's just what you just said. But flip that coin for a second. Think about leadership from a perspective where you're working with somebody who says, instead of you, this is what we're going to do, says, here's where our problem is. This is what's lacking. This is our issue. Right? Think about that. A guy like you is going to bring me 8 different things to do, right? So now I'm trying to funnel you down to give me one good one, right?
Right.
But even if someone who doesn't usually come up with an idea brings something to the table, that person's already bought it. It's their idea.
But you got to be able to. You're right. I see your point and I like it. I'm going to just go back and say that this is one of the things I've seen in our district, and I'll say it right off the top. I don't care if somebody's watching this in our district.
Hold on. I got to I don't want to talk about our district because you know me. I love our district. I love our district.
Okay.
And again,
I'll change it. I'll say,
Okay.
I'll change my words. I'll say, this is something I've seen in many districts. How's that?
Okay. Sure. I mean, yeah. Okay.
If you're going to ask for my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
right, and you don't take it, I'm cool with that.
Right.
Totally. You ask my opinion again, you don't take it, I'm cool with it. Sooner or later, if you keep asking for people's opinions and voices on how to
Mm-hmm.
make this change and fix this problem, but you don't ever take them, then
Mm-hmm.
people will stop offering their opinions because they will feel that their voices are
Sure.
not heard. And
So here,
again,
so Shaq, you and I, so here, so, and I'm a firm believer of this. We're not going to take everybody's idea every time they offer,
of
right? We
course,
can't.
of course.
But here's what's missing in that scenario: the conversation piece after,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
Like
yep.
I think, like here's the thing: even as administrators, right? We give our ideas out, like we share them with superintendents, assistant superintendents, they don't always take them. And then yeah, you're right. As a leader, you're going to be like, wow, I give you ideas all the time. But here's where the respect comes in, right? And the trust and the relationship. If you come back to that person and say, hey, listen, I really did, I appreciate it, you shared that, I liked your idea. Here's why I didn't go in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know what, I we're not at a place we can do that yet. Here's why, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's all. That's what you're asking for. You're not asking to take my idea every time. You're not. I mean, come on. Like, who are we? You're going to take my idea every time, right?
Right, right.
Like that's not going to happen. But if you're going to continue to ask, I think what's important in that leadership thing is that you're going to come back and have that conversation. And again, that's really hard because you work in a very large building
Mm-hmm.
and you want to lead so that there is buy-in, and you have, I think the people in your building feel as that their voices are heard.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so important. Like you have to go back and say, hey, listen, I appreciated that, or hey, that was a good idea. And again, I think, and I think you and I have had this conversation. That also comes back. That sounds like a me problem, not a you problem, right? Like if you're not taking my idea, now my feelings are hurt. That's not their problem. That's your problem. I'm the one, right? And how do you get better as a person to go, well, I'm not going to share my ideas anymore,
but we, but
right?
we, but
So
we've,
how do you not get into that cycle?
but we've talked about
Because
that.
mm-hmm,
We've talked about that at length,
yeah,
and then I kind of want to move on because we have a lot of
yeah,
stuff to talk
that's fine.
about. My thing with that is that I'm going to go back to the same thing. Joe, how many conversations have we had? 100.
A lot, sure.
So this goes back to the same thing. Is there has to be? You said trust, right? I think there has to be trust. I think there has to be respect. I think there has
Mm-hmm,
to be, and I don't actually was going to say above all, but I'm not going to say. I'm just going to say there has to be a certain amount of authenticity.
mm-hmm,
So if you are asking me, if you're asking me my opinion of something,
mm-hmm,
or I'm coming to you with something, I have to believe in my heart. Well, not me personally, because I don't care. I'll do it anyway. But many people have to feel that Susie Smith is coming up to Dr. Carracappa, and she doesn't
mm-hmm,
know him that well. She's
mm-hmm.
like, Dr. Carracappa, I have this idea. I was thinking about this. She needs to feel in her heart and her brain that, oh man, I just walked out of that meeting with that guy and I felt heard. Check. I felt respected.
Yep.
Check. I felt like he was listening to me. Check. Now you come back to Susie and you say, hey, I love stay with me. I love the conversation we had. I appreciate you giving your voice to our school because I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
We've been thinking about it and we've decided to kind of take a different path. But I really want you to know that we appreciate your voice and we want you to keep bringing it. Okay. Now, that is so different than somebody coming up and giving an opinion and never getting feedback. And if they do get feedback, it's quick and it's not something where the person feels heard.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, you're going to have, I think, in any, like, while you were saying that, I was thinking about a large company, right? Like, you think about high school, real large high schools, right? Like 3,000, 4,000 kids. You're talking about 250, 300 teachers, maybe.
yep.
You have one building leader. They're not going to, like, that's, people in people's minds, you think, okay, they should be able to form or know everybody, have some sort of relationship with 300 people, right? But when you think about like, I don't know, an organization like, I don't know, like Chick-fil-A, like, do you think the
I don't
CEO?
need Chick-fil-A.
Well, like, think about that. Like, the CEO. Okay, do you think the CEO of Walmart
I don't go to
or
Walmart.
the CEO of Amazon knows every driver, knows,
Oh.
every person that works in the in one of the warehouses, or who works on the line or does? And no, they don't, right? So, like, that's like, to me, when I think of large, and you think about leadership, right? Oh my gosh, like, you need to have hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of leaders to take a large organization like that. And you have these large companies and they're all being managed. How do you build those relationships so you feel like the people in the organization are staying with you? They're committed to the message. They know what the end goal is, and everybody's on board. And I just think it comes down to building relationships and
Mm-hmm.
having people feel valued. And
Mm-hmm.
again, that's going to be different for the 300th person in your organization and the first person in the
Oh, of
organization, right?
course.
So,
Of course. Yeah,
um,
100%.
I just think you have to, like you said, I think it comes down to a factor of being conscious about who you are, and knowing you're going to make mistakes, and knowing that when you felt like you didn't handle the conversation well, or it didn't go as expected. Because, I mean, many times in my career, Chad, I walked away thinking that conversation went really well, right? Like, oh my gosh, like, that went well.
I know where you're going.
And then finding out like 2 weeks later that the person was offended, or they were very uncomfortable, and you go, wait a minute, like, that's not how I recalled that. And I think as a leader, that's when you go, don't ignore that, right? You reflect on it, you think
Yep.
about the other person's perspective, and then you address it, right? And I think that's when you start to realize, like you said, you start to build, because I think if someone were to do that, and I think it builds a stronger relationship, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that person feels valued. And one of the things that I think is really important in an organization is holding on to your people, making them feel like they're a part of the organization, and
Mm-hmm.
they're in the rowboat with you, right? They're in
Oh,
there. And
I,
you hear that old saying, like, we're all rowing at the same time, we're in
oh my
unison. Well,
God. I,
that's not always the reality. Somebody's hitting the paddle a little different, and
I,
knowing that, right?
I just had, Joe, I literally just had another podcast with a principal from Texas.
Okay.
He just talked about everybody pulling the oars at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
His words,
Well,
that's
it's
what he
such a good
says.
analogy, right? Because,
Yep.
I mean, you think about that sport, like, everybody has to be in unison. But
Yep.
but here's where I would say, with respect to that gentleman, here's what I'd say. That's ideal, and we all want our schools to run that way. But the reality of it is that there's 12 people in that boat. If we're talking about a school, there's probably 6 people hitting that water differently, right? That oar's going in the right.
Right.
We got
Right.
people in the boat going the wrong direction, right? So, like, but if you're running it and it's running well, yeah, it does look like you're all hitting it at the same time, and you're going as fast as possible, and it's like,
Mhm.
wow, life is good. But in reality, that's rare. I think that's rare. I think when you hit that, that's like utopia, and you ride it for a while.
Mhm.
I think our leader and myself, we talk a lot about, like, just a year. It's a roller coaster, right? You're going to have
Mhm.
these epiphanies. You're like, this is great, and then you're going to crash, and then you're going to come back up, and the ebb and flow of what a year brings, just because of the time and the year, the length of it. And you just, I think as a leader, you just have to ride it. But here's what I will say. Just as I think those we're trying to lead all are going to be up and down as well, so are the leaders,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
so are leaders. Like, leaders aren't going to come into the building like every day going, yeah, let's get it, let's go, man. Right? Like we're human too, and we have lives, and you might have a bad day. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where, if you can get to a point where, people that you're working with can respect you in that sense, like, yeah, I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think you're going to make it. I just think that makes such a difference, the relationship piece of that. And I
Oh,
think it trickles down to your students. I think when you have strong relationships with your teachers, I think that sets the foundation for your teachers to have strong relationships with their students.
of
I
course.
really do.
You talked about first of all, I'm looking at some of my stuff here. Your opening thing, you said you stand for kids, right?
Yeah.
Stand for kids, equity, inclusion.
Yes. Very much so.
Briefly, what do you mean?
Yeah. Where do you start? That's not a big one,
Briefly.
right?
Yeah.
Um, as a leader, I think when I'm working with a team and we're talking about what's best, if we make decisions and things that we're going to do, it's always in what's best for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Always.
Yep.
And I think, that's not always popular sometimes. That's sometimes there's factors that get in the way of that. But, as a leader, I think you have to be committed to something. And for me, it's
I
that.
like
Like,
I like that.
I really truly believe, as I look through my career, really tough decisions that we've made, things that we've done as a building, changes that we've had to, implement, have always been, and in my opinion, they've always been and well researched on what was best for kids.
I
And not every, and not every outcome would maybe worked out, but the reality of it was we did it with the intent that it was what was best for kids.
I
And
love that you said intent. I love that
Mhm.
you said intent because that I kind of was going to say again. You get into a situation. Obviously, we're teaching kids. That's what our jobs are.
Mhm.
But I think the intent behind it is really critical because teachers, and all staff members need to realize that what your intent is. We're
Right,
doing this for the betterment of students.
sure.
And you actually said before, I wanted to touch on this. It wasn't something I was planning, but I think it's a good thing. We're talking about like you were reading a book and you were talking about intangibles, and I
Mhm.
think that'd be an interesting few minutes. Like, what do you mean? What was the name of
Yeah.
the book?
Future Driven.
Okay,
It's
so
by
what?
David Gurria, I think it is.
So
Um,
what's the
so,
intangibles?
the book itself, I mean, Future Driven, right? So when you talk about high schools, and it really gets into what I'm really passionate about is, you know, we only have 780 some days, right? Whatever that number is for a kid to be in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're tasked with getting them on a path, getting them into a position where, they're going to go, into the workforce, or whether they're going to go into the military or post-secondary or whatever it may be. We need to find them a pathway. And really what I've always said to kids is, we're looking for you to find your path. And
No.
for some kids that doesn't happen until later, and it's okay. But we wanted to put them on a path. And the reason for that is this, Shep, and I think this book really rammed this home for me. It talked about that, 7.1 million jobs could be lost in the next 5 years because of automation. I want you to think about that. 7.1 million jobs. We're taught, when you talk about education, we have kids in the middle school that we're trying to train for jobs that don't even exist because
Yep.
automation is going to take over, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like these jobs that these kids are going to have don't even exist yet. We don't even know what they are, but yet we're tasked as educators to teach them and to prepare them for it, right? And I think when you start to think that way, it gets real scary because what are those skills? What is still important, right? Um, I think the other part of it was like 2.1 million of those new jobs that will be created will all be in technology.
Mm-hmm.
that someday will be then taken over by animation or AI, right? So it's like in the next 10 to 15 years, you know, the jobs that we all think that, and you see it already, right?
Yeah.
Like, and this was a perfect example. Like, you go into the supermarket, there aren't even people there to check you out anymore. You're checking yourself out,
Right.
right? It's
Right. Right.
like jobs that we, particularly saw through our lifetime are already being phased out. But these new technologies, when you talk about AI and automation and things like that, it's going to happen at a much faster rate. And the jobs that are going to be there for our children and their children are going to look very different than what they look today. And his book goes on to talk about really what are those intangibles, what are we teaching them, right? And the thing that really crops to the front of this book is critical thinking. You still need
Yep.
people to think critically, right? Um, and that tends to be a skill that we talk a lot about, but yet, where is it? Right? When you talk about
Right.
your curriculum, like, where is it? And how many opportunities are we providing with students to think critically, and how often and every day? And, I think when you talk about education in the next couple of years, I mean, you and I will be retired, but the reality of it is, like, what we do could look very, very different. And think about that in the sense that we talk about leadership a lot, and those leaders that we're training and coming into the profession as administrators and teachers, what they're like, my daughter, I mean, she's graduating, this May. And to think about in 5 years, what her classroom will look like, how different it would have looked to my elementary classroom, and back in the late 90s. So, I think that in perspective, it's just we're training children for jobs that we don't even know what the jobs are going to be. So it's critical that we identify the skills that can carry over into any job,
But what I
right?
find,
Working cooperatively, critical thinking. I think, to me, that's the biggest one. We talk a lot about relationships. Are our kids equipped to work cooperatively in a setting, or are we just training our kids to be
but
working
that,
in
but that,
cubicles?
I think, Joe, that comes down to, like, when you talk about intangibles. I literally asked my class the other day. It's so funny.
Mm-hmm.
You said things that I got to think about. Just happened. Karma. I literally said to my class in the beginning of class, everybody, what is my passion? Like, you, Shap, and I'm like, yeah, mate, what's my passion? They're like, oh my God, you love lifting. You love exercise. I'm like, how do you know that? And they're like, well, you talk about it. We know it's your passion. I said,
Mm-hmm.
it is. And I said, what's your passion? I said, now, a lot of you are young. You might not have a passion yet because you're still very young and figuring it out. I said, but getting a passion and having a passion is so critical in life because it gives you a lot of purpose for
Yeah.
things. And you can have more than one passion. But I think in schools, one of the things that is severely lacking, it's all over. It's not one school. It's talk about critical thinking, right? Taking risks,
Oh.
being able to communicate, not being afraid to fail. Those things, to be able to teach them, you need to be willing to come out of your typical teacher-centered classroom
Mm-hmm.
and do something that is getting kids talking and thinking and acting. And you need to promote a class and a school where
Mm-hmm.
students are not going to feel judged if they're wrong.
Yeah.
They're not going to, and of course, we could go down a rabbit hole of the grading issue, which is total BS. We could go down that like crazy because here's my thing with that, and then I want to move on because I'll just go nuts. High achieving kids,
I'm going to
right?
step out of that conversation.
Right, right. You got the high achieving kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
All about the grades.
Mm-hmm.
All about the grades. Not to say that they
Mm-hmm.
don't want to think critically, but about the grades. But what about those kids that are not? And then, like I said, I don't want to go delve deep into it because it would be a huge rabbit hole of things. But I think, again, when you talk about those intangibles, and we'll have another conversation about this at
Well,
some
Shep,
point.
here, let me interrupt you, because what you're
Sure.
talking about is, here's what we want. We don't want kids to be scoring high, getting we want kids to love learning. Right? Like
Exactly.
when you talk about passion, we want kids to love learning, right? And when you can get a kid to see that, they can learn, right? And that they can achieve some success. Like that, like you talk about passion, like that's going to develop into something else. But
Mm-hmm.
I think what happens is we have many students that never get there. They never get that love of learning because
Why?
maybe it's their experience. I mean, and we can talk about that for hours, right? But the bottom line is, um, it. I just think if we can get them to love learning, they're going to reach their potential every time,
True.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we don't, we you talk about risks. We run the risk of them not reaching their potential before they leave us. And when you find that love, to me, when you find that this learning thing's not that bad. I've done this, or I can see some success. And that's just that success is going to be different for every child. But the reality of it is, if kids can get there and they can taste that, I think what you're going to see is the skills that you and I are talking about. It's not going to matter what the job is, because no matter what job is happening in 2040, it's going to require them to continue to learn because of the way that these jobs are going to be adapting, right? You're not going to, what did I read? I read something a couple weeks ago. It was just about, when you talk about the average, like when you looked at, our parents, the likelihood of them, most of 90% of them had one job, right? They
Yeah.
had one job. Like they went to work, they did this, they did it for 40
Yeah.
years, they retired. Right? Us, like our generation, I think the average was like 3 to 5 jobs. By the time they entered the workforce, the average 50-year-old male at this point has had 3 to 5 jobs. They're projecting out, like for our kids and their kids, like they're gonna have like 8 to 10 jobs,
I
and
know.
like they're gonna be able to get laid off from 2 jobs and subsidize it from the other 8 easily,
Yep.
right? Like the workforce is just going to change. So when you talk about, are we preparing kids for that? Because like they're not going to work at the Dairy Queen for 35 years. Right? That's just
Right.
not the
Right.
reality. They might own a Dairy Queen, but even that, they're gonna end up opening a Dairy Queen, closing it, and then opening, like entrepreneurship. They'll own
Mm-hmm.
3 different things. So, just think if we can get kids to, and I use the word love, and I know that's strong. If we can just get kids to see the importance of learning, I think that we're already winning the battle for them to reach their potential. And I think that's going to be at the heart of, what education is going to look like, in the next 10 years. Sure.
But that's a team effort.
Yeah,
It's a
for
team
sure.
effort.
For sure.
I wanted to cover these two quickly, and
Okay.
you talked about, well, first of all, I'm going to ask you two things that you're really proud of, and the challenges you've overcome. And
Oh,
before you answer, let me
whew.
chime in real quick.
Yeah.
So, to everybody watching, Dr. Carracappa, I remember when he was going for his doctorate, I was one of the people that was involved in kind of the program he was doing. It was actually very interesting for me. And I kind of think about, like, I always say to myself, if somebody I respect is going for something, I always give them a lot of credit for that, because it's easier not to. It is easier not to take that risk. It's easier to just keep doing what you're doing. So I know you're going to mention that, but I just wanted to say kudos to you on getting that done. I'm proud of you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, um, I think when you think about the challenge in for me, and everybody's path in their dissertation is different. Like I've known people that have been able to start their program, write the dissertation, be done, and they're done in a year and a half, 18 months, and it's like wow, right? And my pathway, like a lot of kids in school, was just very different. Started, started the program, and now looking at it, probably not the right reasons for me. Um, when the conversation started about going back for your doctorate and would you be interested in that? It was with the idea that, I'd make that leap into, administrative,
Right.
district office and so forth. And and things change, and I think that's really what the reality is. I think in our profession there was a change, and I was, wasn't, you know, in that path anymore, and had to make a change in my career. And at the time, it was, a difficult decision, but made that decision, and then the dissertation thing got away from me for a while. And I really have to credit the people that were in my corner with that, because I just didn't see that as a priority, or
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see why anymore. It took colleagues, it took my wife, to help me understand that, one of it was for my kids. I really
Mm-hmm.
wanted them to see how important it is to start something and finish something. I think when we talk about young kids now, and my kids are getting older, a couple in college, one still in high school, but having them understand, one, you're never too old to learn, right? And
Mm-hmm.
two, that you just don't start something and not finish it. And while it took me longer than most. Once I hit my groove, I was able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But there were a lot of people that were in my corner that supported me, and I could lean on, which was a big, big, big help for me. So that was probably lately the biggest challenge for me. And what was the other question? So
Just
success? What I'm most
what's
proud
something,
of?
yeah, something you're proud of. I mean, I know
You
what you
know,
said.
I know what I said in the paper, but I've been thinking a lot more about this, and it really hits home for me. I think one of the proudest things I am, we're all proud of our kids, right? Like, the
Mm-hmm.
things that they do. You know, it, it's hit me lately because my daughter's going to be graduate, right? And we've been having a lot of conversations about starting to look for jobs, and looking to be a teacher full time, and what that means, and the commitment and things like that. For me, like, every time like that reality hits me, it just blows me away. I cannot be more proud. And Melanie, I do Melanie was not the greatest student, right? Like, she really worked hard. Like, she had to work really hard for everything she
Mm-hmm.
got. And you talk about kids, like, just having the courage to, like, stay with it, when it could have been so easy to give up. I think about that all the time, and I did. You need good people in your corner, and I think my wife was like a personal cheerleader.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but to see that in your kids, I couldn't be more proud, and I couldn't be more proud to tell people my daughter is going to be a teacher. You know, and here's the thing I do know: like, watching her go through this to get there, she's going to be a good one. And here's how
Mm-hmm.
I know: because she won't settle for not being a good one. Like, I just know, like, no one's good when they start, and that's what we continuously tell. Look, you're going to get a job. The likelihood of you being awesome on day one is, like, you're going to have to learn as you go, and and you're going to have people here that can support you. Each day, the goal is always going to be how to be better than the day before,
I
and
love
you
I
can
love that
really,
you I love that you said that. That's so amazing, man. I would you caught me off guard.
yeah.
Yeah,
I just
no,
think it's
but
that time, like we've been
but
talking a lot about. And since I filled that out for you, but we've been having a lot of conversations the last couple of weeks, and it's just been, it really is. I mean, I really could not be more proud, and
oh
and
man, that's are you kidding? It's great.
yeah, could not be more proud
That's
of her.
great. You're
So,
proud of your kids, man. I can't wait till Melanie sees this.
well,
She's gonna
I
be
was gonna say, Shap, I hope that she will sometime.
she's gonna see it. Are you kidding? That's
Well,
great,
here's a nice
man.
thing. When you said, "Hey, will you come on my show?" The first thought was, you know what? Well, when I'm long gone, at least
Oh,
they'll have this.
oh
There'll
my
be some record of
god,
me being
dude.
there.
Come on. Come on. Okay,
No,
let's
this has been a lot of fun, and I think it's important to have these conversations and
yeah.
be able to share your thoughts, and here's the thing: like, to not always be judged about them. Like, they're
Oh
your
yeah.
thoughts. They're your thoughts. Like, they're not. They don't necessarily reflect on certain people, or range from this school or that school or this. But we've talked about some good topics that really are across our country, and across our world. Like, we're
Hmm.
not the only ones in education dealing with these issues, leadership, no matter whether it's in education or whether it's in business or the military, whatever it may be, leadership is important. And our kids they have to be trained to be leaders, right? Like you and I have had this conversation once before, and I think the question was, are leaders born or are they trained or are they, they brought through, I always come back to when I think about the military, like I didn't serve in the military, my father did, but, when you go through the military, they're training you and they're leaders. Like not everybody is a leader, right? And those leadership skills, and they really hone in on that. Right? And I think if you look anywhere, I think that's to me one of the places. Like when you think about Annapolis and West Point, and how they build their officers and the training that goes into that, it's critical. And I think in other areas we can take a lot from that.
Oh yeah, and
I try to reach that.
I mean, leaders are going to be obviously, I believe leaders have some inherent skills already, like they have them. I mean, and then you build on them. It's a combination of both. I think that obviously we can help build leaders, but they have to have that motivation, that desire, that curiosity, that grit. They have to have all those things. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Before I have Dr. Carracappa give his closing message, I want to mention a couple things real quick that I think are critical. First of all, for those of you who are watching this, I work with Dr. Carracappa. He's one of the assistant principals at my school. And I want to say this, people who know me are not surprised I'll say it, but I will say it, that I want people to take in that I am having a podcast with somebody who I work with. And somebody might say, oh my God, how you doing that? Very simple. We have a great amount of respect for each other. And I think that to me, among many things I talk about all the time, is in order for our world to be a better place, our schools to be a better place, there has to be trust. There has to be respect. There has to be an open ability to disagree without feeling attacked. And there has to be a willingness to put ourselves out there for the greater good. I would never have asked Joe to come on if I didn't feel that he would bring something special to the table. There's no ulterior motive. The motive is simple. Joe's a good man. He's a good man. He's a good leader. He's smart. That is why I asked him to come on, because I always believe I would never, ever have a person on Cutting the Crap with Shap who I didn't think was going to make a positive difference. So just throwing that out there. Joe, what's your closing message?
I think for everybody that was to see this, just to know that not everything you're going to achieve in life is going to be given to you. You're going to have to work for it. And with that said, don't give up. I just can't. Life will throw a lot of things at you, and things will get tough. Whether you're an adult, whether you're a child or a student, just know. And I said this a few times tonight. Like, gotta approach life like tomorrow is going to be better. And I say this to my kids all the time. I say this repeatedly to my kids, and we always say, you'll hear everyone say, "I hope you have a good day." I say to my kids every day I leave this house, make today a good day, because I believe you have the power to do that. No matter what anybody throws at you or what life brings, you have that power to make that day a good day. And if you can find a way to do it, even on your worst days, I was so happy to see that my wife came in from, she was kind of in a summer. Right? I know she had it, but when you think about it, she took the time to stop and get some sunflowers, probably for her and for my daughter. They love sunflowers, but you have the power, and I think when you think about life, just don't give up. There's always people that you can talk to. There's always somebody there for you. Don't give up. So, Seth, I can't thank you for allowing me to be here. And I hope that the other leaders and the people that follow you and have been on your show, I hope I've lived up to their I hope I've lived up to their words as well. So, but I had a lot of fun tonight, and as always, I think we'll you and I will continue to have these
Oh
conversations.
yeah,
Um, and I enjoy them. I really do, because I think they're healthy. And I think that if anything, they make us better people.
I got it. So everybody, real quick. First of all, Joe, thank you again, my man. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Our
Anytime.
typical thing that we do every podcast, we always finish with something positive to end the podcast. And I'm going to generally I have a quote in my head way in advance, but in this case I don't, because I came up with something as Dr. Carracappa was finishing, and I want
Oh, Shap, I
to.
had a quote. I was supposed to use that quote. That was
I know,
my
but
fault.
there's no fault, man.
I'm the worst guest ever, man.
No, man. You spoke with your heart. Here's my quote. Okay, it's very simple. Everybody ready? First of all, thank you again, everybody, for checking in. If you'd like to be part of the podcast, Cutting the Crap with Shap, please let me know. Please subscribe, listen, share. We want to hear your voice. Here it is. Be better every single day. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate you. Everybody,
Thanks,
talk
Shap.
to you soon.